All right. So one of the soapbox topics that I get on is about skill development. So like we were talking about why I do the podcast or any of the other stuff. And what I've taken over the last few years is, and especially with the rise of like AI and all this other stuff, is people aren't focused on like building a skill and then understanding that it takes time. So when we look at the podcast as a like platform or medium for speaking, getting your thoughts out, being able to have a conversation, hold it, do it intelligently, back all the stuff up that you're talking about, is like that adds a skill in public speaking, right? It adds the skill of being able to communicate with somebody. It adds the skill of maybe debate, right? It adds the skill of like having an intelligent conversation and the skill of, and I'm going to call it a skill because it can be developed in having the confidence in yourself in putting yourself out there, right? So a skill in being confident in who you are, right? Because it can be gained, it can also be lost. So when we look at things that can be gained, right, it's not an innate trait in somebody. Like confidence can be built, right? Speaking can be built. The ability to articulate your words can be built. The ability to string together thoughts can be built, right? Like we build it from a baby doesn't know how to string together words, and we teach them how to string together words that form senses, that create images that live in our heads. And so when you look at any of these things, right, whether it be the podcast or writing or putting a post out or taking pictures, right, those are all skills that can be improved. And so the longer that you do them, the skill is going to become better. And then you have something that no one can take it away, right? Whether the podcast platforms that we put everything out on go away, whether LinkedIn gets shut down, Facebook gets shut down, Instagram gets shut down, whatever gets shut down, there are a few things that are not going to be shut down and they will be here till the end of time. And that is the mail, right? That is a printing press, right? Whether that is your printer or a commercial print house or an actual like printing press, right? Or you get out a brick and stone tablet and start chiseling, like that is not going to go away. So the ability to communicate, whether that's in written word, whether that's speaking that then is transcribed into written word or voice, however you disseminate that is going to be important. And even if you go back to like Theodore Roosevelt, right, his man in the arena speech was, it might have been recorded in 1914, but the word of that speech lives on, right? The whole man in the arena, and everybody quotes it, that he gave in London in person, right, at an event that he happened to write down, and somebody probably transcribed or like took notes for the whole speech. And so you have things like that that are going to live on no matter what. And so your ability to communicate, again, whether that's in voice or in text, is going to be something that lives on no matter the platform that we do it through, right? And with computers, that word just gets disseminated faster. I mean, again, you have the best-selling book in the world called the Bible that has lived for, thousands of years, right? And we did it in person-to-person communication and speeches, and a lot of shit was memorized prior to having the Gutenberg printing press. So you go back to, thousands of years ago, all stories, all lessons were handed down from your tribe, right? And stories, right? Which is why like Loch Ness Monster and a lot of these other things were created as a way to like keep kids from swimming in the lake and drowning. And so you have all these stories and these fables and everything else that were built to teach a lesson to somebody, but it was all done through spoken word. And now, with the advent of the printing press and now digital, you have this ability to disseminate word faster. And the other thing too is you, in doing all this, you become so much more confident in who you are, what you do, your communicating abilities, that you're not going to be, you might tone it down in person, but you still have those thoughts and people know that you have that thought when you go out in public, right? So on a stage, again, you're going to be, you need to emphasize a lot of your opinions when you go like in a platform like this or on stage, because you need to really emphasize and put a fine point on your points, where in person you're going to be typically more nuanced. You're not going to be as abrasive to somebody in person as you would be like on stage or on a podcast or anything like that. So I don't know if that helps and why we do the podcast, but wanted to record this for, you know, one, my own purposes, but also for anybody out there that's thinking about a podcast or writing a book or starting a blog or a newsletter or anything.
We actually had a meeting. It was a staff meeting this morning, and we were talking about leadership. And it was like, is leadership are you born a leader, or is it a learned behavior? Right? Did you learn how to become a leader? And I think the consensus was like, it's a little bit of both, right? Like a lot of people kind of have the tendencies, but you're also trained. And like the president of our company was there, and he was just like, and everyone almost reflects a leader is like, he's like, yeah, I'm bad at public speaking. I hate public speaking. Like, why does a leader in public speaking have to be together? But it always is, right? Your leader has to be your speaker, right? And and yeah, talk about just kind of doing podcasts and being more comfortable with yourself. Like I've been to the point too where like I became more comfortable. Well, one, right, when you put yourself out there, you're kind of testing the world with like your thoughts, right? It's like less than one-on-one conversation, but you're sending it out to the world, right? It's the internet, so it can literally go to everywhere. I think I was looking at our podcast, and we've got like 25 countries have at least listened to one episode. I'm like, that just boggles my mind, man. Like 25 countries have looked at it, and but when you start getting a little bit of positive, you get negative feedback too. But when you get positive feedback, you're like, okay, I am resonating, and like so it gives you a little bit more. I don't want to say courage, but gives you a little bit more of like, okay, I do have something to say that people want to hear. And to my wife the other day was talking about something like, she's like, it doesn't bother you when you hear your own voice. I'm like, I've become numb to that, because you used to like you record your voice and you cringe when you listen to it, right? And now we'll record a podcast, and I might not go because we've built a little bit of backlog on the release, so I may not listen to it for like 2 weeks, and I forget what I talked about. So I'll go back and play it back. I always play it back and make some edits and stuff like that. And I'll go back and play it back, and I'm like, man, I sound like pretty smart right there. Like I don't remember the whole conversation, but I'm listening to it for the first time again, almost. Like it's almost an out of body experience. Like we're having a conversation, and then get the chance to sit in the corner and be a fly on the wall and listen to the conversation. Like I have a few brain cells that work.
Well, and it's so, I mean, again, I think for leaders in public speaking, the reason we put that up on a pedestal is because like outside of dying or falling, like public speaking is the number one fear of
Mhm.
people, right? And I think this is a lot to do with education. I won't go down that path, but like of suppressing people's ability to speak, right? You're told to sit down and shut up.
Yeah.
So for anybody that speaks out, automatically becomes a leader. So within society, you have the people that speak out and up, uh, automatically get to that quote leadership status, even if they don't have the traits. And then the longer that you're around, you build up more of that credo. And I think we also have a tendency to see the people that we see the most and are the loudest, we give the most credence to in some cases because they're just loud and there, which also goes to your own marketing, to your own, outreach of, hey man, if you have an opinion on something, by sharing it, you're going to, it's just like with clients, right? The more they see you, the more you show up, the more
Yeah.
you're there for them, the more projects you're going to get. It's a very basic formula. And so the more that we can do that and show up and be there and be top of mind for the thing that we do, the more money and projects we're going to get. And so, usually in a group setting, right? The one that speaks up, the one that takes charge, the one that helps direct traffic, right? That is the leader of the group. And that goes hand in hand with not being shy. It goes hand in hand with speaking up. It goes hand in hand with taking responsibility. And so speaking just happens to be one of that because,
Yeah.
again, we've been just so conditioned as a society to, sit down and shut up.
I think too. I mean, communication is probably one of the best leadership traits, right? So you have to be able to communicate, and how do you communicate? By speaking, and especially public speaking. If you're owner of a company, or president of a company, or somebody like that, you got to be able to talk to all the people, right?
And like fire them up, right? So again,
Yeah.
like I gave the example of like Teddy Roosevelt, the reason that he's a remembered president is because he spoke and he traveled around the country. He went and was in the military and did a lot of stuff, there. He also went and spoke to a lot of people. His speeches are remembered. Same with Abraham Lincoln. You don't, like, we remember the Gettysburg Address, right? We
Yeah.
remember fourscore and 70 years ago. Like you remember those speeches by people that, provided them. There's a ton of presidents that you don't remember because they maybe weren't great speakers or didn't give that, impressive speech for people. And so words, do motivate people. You go back and look at Napoleon, he was a great orator. He could convince people of a lot of things. He had his own downfalls too as a person, but you look at, at all these books, right? Those are people that spoke out, that had an
Yeah.
opinion, weren't afraid to voice it, and can convince people to, to get published, right? Like, most of these go through a publishing house. So they had to be able to convince somebody that their book was good or for them to at least read it, so they had to do that in person. Then they read it, then they got published, then they went through the whole process. So, I mean, selling, speaking, communicating effectively is one of the most valuable skills that you can do. I mean, people make a career just speaking, right?
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, you almost arguably say, I mean, even on the evil side of the world, right? Like Hitler was probably the best public speaker in the history of the world, and he like created, I mean, a really awful movement, but he created a movement based on his speaking abilities. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, if you look at the communist dictators, they all moved it well. And I wouldn't put Hitler was different in that it wasn't communism. Like he was elected to the majority of his positions. And you look at the history of Germany during that time, it like it's very fascinating. You should go read some stuff on it. But yeah, I mean, you could move a population, right? Like Hitler did have the majority of Germany behind him for most of his reign. Like whatever you think about, bringing it to today, whatever you think about Putin, he does have a very high approval rating in Russia.
Yeah.
He does give speeches and he can move a population. The whatever you think about Barack Obama is the same way, right? Like the dude could speak, people liked him, he was charismatic. There's good and bad things to say about that. You look at Joe Biden, you cannot say that about him. Like he is
Right.
not a great speaker. He is not a great orator. And so you just look through history and the people that we remember the most fondly were the ones that could speak the best. Whether their policies were good or not, that's a whole different conversation. But how we look back on people of fondness, right? Like Eisenhower versus Truman versus Kennedy, like JFK was the most enthusiastic one of the bunch. So we remember him the most fondly, right? And I think speaking, does that, and the ability to move people, again, what your policies and business are, two very different things. And I think that because we value speaking so much, we put it on a pedestal versus, policy and practicality. They're two very different things in how we weigh them.
Dude, you just gave me a whole new perspective of everything I've been doing. And just kind of like, I knew I was building skills and stuff, but I never really thought about it like that. I was looking at more of like marketing skills and all those sort of stuff because I'm having to learn how to do marketing and I'm not advertising, but those sort of things. But yeah, man, like I have like built a whole bunch of like speaking skills and communicating skills, and I didn't even know what copywriting meant. I heard people saying copywriting. I had to Google it, and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. But like, how to learn that?
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about copywriting, right, and some of the greats, and even when you think about advertising, all advertising doing is getting a message that resonates with a market out to more people, and you pay to put in front of them. That is all that advertising is. So even if you're not paying to put it in front of people, right, you walking to a job site trailer and trying to sell somebody on a project, you walking into an owner's office, right, and trying to sell him on a project, that is advertising, right? You putting together a brochure, that is advertising. Like pretty much everything you do is advertising. You might not always pay for the placement of it,
Right.
but it is advertising. And so the better your ability to write, to put copy together, to understand what a headline is, to understand like intrigue, to split test it. And the more that you dig into the marketing world, the more analytical you find it, the more split tests that have been done and what works better in putting things together, the more you understand like how to actually, there are a lot of scientific structures around copy of where you put the close, how you do a stack for an offer, like what things you need to include in your offers. You in the internet marketing world, like your scarcity offers of like, this is going away, or we only have 4 or whatever it is. And then you have, like the stories around it and what are the benefits. And the more that you explain the benefits of working with you, what they're going to get, and not necessarily the product itself, because frankly, in construction, especially, I mean, this is for a lot of industries, honestly, like most contractors are comparable. Like you're all going to get the job done. You're all going to build it. It'll all be code. It won't fall down anytime soon, more than likely. Like it's pretty comparable. So what's the experience going to be like in working with you? And the more that you can explain the experience of what it's going to be like to work with you, knowing the problems are going to come up, knowing that issues are going to happen, knowing all those things, like what does that experience look like? And the better you can paint that picture of having a good experience of, hey man, I'm going to work with you. We're going to, whenever an issue comes up on the job site, I'll be there to make sure it happened, or somebody on our team will be there to work through the issue. We want to get solutions. If you want me to, I'll call you immediately when it happens, but I would rather call you once we have a solution to that problem on the job site to make sure that, we'll get some costs associated with it, give you a couple options, and then you can choose on, what you want to do, on how much you want to pay to fix this, whatever it might be, problem that's happening on a job site. We'll give you a couple options that we think through, for, me as the engineer and the contractor. We'll work through that with you. Again, we want this to be collaborative, and however much or little you want to be involved in that process, we're more than happy to do that. But again, we want to save your time. We know you got other stuff to do and you're not going to be worried about construction. So again, that's my job, being an engineer record, is to come to you and, work through these problems with the contractors to, again, present you solutions so that you can make a couple of decisions and we move on. We get it done and we move forward. Like, I mean, stuff like that is what an owner wants to hear, man. Hey, we're going to take care of you. We know what we're doing. I've done this 100 times. Here's when a problem happens, because they will happen, right? Like the people that want to say that a problem's never going to happen on a job site have never done a construction project. Like something's going to go wrong. I don't know what, I don't know when, don't know how, I don't know how much it's going to cost, but something will go wrong. And here's how we're going to work through that to resolve the issue. Here's how we do change orders. Here's how we do, like anything else in that project. And being upfront with these owners, being upfront with everybody, and hey, here's the process. Here's how we're gonna. It makes everybody feel at ease. And I know I just like blew through this, but that's the point, right? It shows that I know what I'm talking about. It shows you that I know what I'm talking about, and to make you comfortable with how we're gonna approach this. But again, it comes from speaking. It comes from experience. It comes from being able to string all this stuff together. And like you said, like me listening back to this, like I probably just blacked out and said all these things. But again, like I know what I'm doing.
Speaking from your heart. So when you speak from your heart and you tell your truth, you can just kind of black out and it kind of flows out.
So
So,
cool, man.